That's a lot, isn't it? That's just one cemetery. We saw a cemetery like this in Normandy, France. All the Americans that died on the beaches. Amazing. How many? May we never forget freedom. It doesn't come free. I'm not going to ask anybody to stand, but if you served in the military, I want you to raise your hand real high, and keep them up. If you are the spouse of somebody, y'all keep them up, raise your hand too, even now, because these spouses went through a lot also. Thank you. Thank you for your service, for your spouse's service. I didn't serve in the military. I always hated sitting down in the church when all the other men around me stood up, but we married at a younger age and they were doing the drafting at that time, and we were way down on the list on the drafting. I didn't serve. But yeah, freedom does not come free. And a lot of them didn't come home. A lot. God bless those people. Today we're talking about Jerusalem, the holy city. What has and what will happen in the city of Jerusalem. But before we get to this, I know that small print, I don't know if you can you read it, Willie? Yeah, I'm afraid. I had it on an Excel spreadsheet. But what I've got here is when we go back to May the 16th, I taught that lesson, Galatians chapter 1 in the introduction. Well, then we put Galatians, I did Israel 1, Israel 2, Satan 1, Satan 2. Last week I was out and Charlie did chapter 4. So, where'd my mouse go? So now we're doing Jerusalem today, and next Sunday we're going to do not only the new Jerusalem, but the new earth, the new heaven, the new Jerusalem. And then I'm going to take 1, 2, 3, 4 Sundays in a row and go back and pick up those chapters we missed. I did 1, Charlie did 4, so the following Sunday will be Galatians 2, then Galatians 3, 5, and 6. And we'll start some new study in July. So we will go back and pick these up. But I thought these other lessons were important, especially the lessons on Satan. I think the time is right. The thing that bothers me, we sat in this room and we did a 2 Sunday study on Satan and demons, and we understand it, we believe it. You'd never read it in the press. I watched a TV show during the week, and the guy that committed the murder, he says, I deserve to die. I have a monster in me. That ring a bell? But nobody will use the word demon in public. They won't print it, they won't say. All these things that go that are bad, demons are involved. We don't know how much or anything about it. But it's not being taught. Paul warned us about this, and he's warning Christians about it as well. Okay, we're going to move on. Next subject, I want to thank those of you that came out to Peggy's funeral. We had 17 members of this class there, plus 4 former members. Well, you was ready to jump on that, wasn't you? David had already counted and told me there was 21. But Mike and Marcia and Don and Judy were there, and it was a good job. We filled that chapel up. And I appreciate everybody being there.
His son was overwhelmed too with the number.
Yeah, the family was.
His first words were, "Oh wow."
Yeah. When you do a funeral service, you have to have what's in your mind. What do you need to do? What do you need to talk about? Who are you trying to reach? What you're trying to accomplish? So I put these together, and the number one thing is to comfort the family. That's one. The second thing you gotta be sure you're doing, the family understands, like in Peggy, her body is ashes now, but her soul is in paradise, and she's okay. We just have, in this room, we understand that, we hear that a lot, but I don't know how many of the family members understand. So you try two or three places in this service to let them know about paradise or heaven, and that's where they are. The other thing is you need to think about the people that are there watching. They also need comfort. They're close friends and stuff. But I don't know that among those in the seating out there, there may be non-Christians. So you kind of want to work that in there too. But family is first. After the service, and everybody left, I walked out front of the chapel, and a lady came up to me, and I would guess she's between 85 and 90. And she said, "Young man, I want to tell you, you gave me something to think about."
Wow.
I said, "Well, good." She said, "I'm going to go home and think about this." I said, "I hope you do." And that's all it was said. So God's way of telling me the message is reaching people. You don't always get to know it.
Yeah.
It just happens. So it kind of made my day. And for those of you who don't go to the gravesite, just so you'll know, I go out and do a short service. Man, I can't get my throat.
Got a big frog.
And I tell them I'm going to do a short service, and then we'll have a closing prayer, and I said, I'm going to walk away, and I'll leave the family their privacy, and I'll go get in the car and I'll leave. So I don't talk to anybody after that. And it went well, and Peggy's son James called me later and thanked me for the service on there. Anyway, I just want to kind of update you on that. Funerals are not fun to do, but I can't let somebody else do it that doesn't know that person well. You know, Larry Ratliff was one of my best friends, and I didn't know if I could do his funeral, and I said, if I don't, who does? And they say, Jerry Spinks. Spinks? That's his last name?
Thanks.
Huh?
Thanks.
And Jerry would do a real good one, but Jerry doesn't know anything about Larry. So I said, no, I'll do those, to do that. 'Cause that's important, I think. Okay, we're going to move on with this study today about Jerusalem, the holy city, what has and will happen. Clicker won't work. There it goes. It was in Jerusalem where the tribe of Benjamin failed to run the Jebusites out of when the Israelites were moving into the promised land. For years, Israel did not possess the city of Jerusalem. Did you know that? When they came in and they settled all the new promised land, they didn't have Jerusalem. The tribe of Benjamin was the one supposed to drive out all of the Canaanites and the Jebusites that were in Jerusalem, and they didn't do it. Judges chapter 1, the Benjamites, however, did not drive out the Jebusites who were living in Jerusalem. To this day, the Jebusites live there with the Benjaminites. It was in Jerusalem where King David finally conquered Jerusalem for Israel, and he made it their capital. That's found in 2 Samuel, said that King David and his men marched to Jerusalem to attack the Jebusites who lived there. David captured the city of Jerusalem, which he called the city of David. It was in Jerusalem where David chose to build a temple for God and a house for the Ark of the Covenant. In 2 Samuel again, David said to Nathan the prophet, "Here I am living in a house made of cedar while the Ark of the Covenant of God remains in a tent," the tabernacle. But God said to David, you may not build a house for my name, for you are a man of war and have shed blood. It was in Jerusalem where David committed adultery with Bathsheba and then committed murder by having Uriah, Bathsheba's husband, killed. Still in 2 Samuel, then David sent messengers to get her. She came to him and he slept with her. In the morning, David wrote a letter to Joab and he sent it with Uriah. In it he wrote, put Uriah out in the front where the fighting is the fiercest, then withdraw from him so that he will be struck down and die. It was in Jerusalem where Solomon built a magnificent temple. David was allowed to gather materials, but he wasn't allowed by God to build the temple. So his son Solomon, when he became king after David, he started the building of the temple. Magnificent temple. In 2 Chronicles said, then Solomon began to build the house of the Lord in Jerusalem on Mount Moriah, where the Lord had appeared to David his father. It was in Jerusalem where the Babylonians destroyed the city and they plundered the temple in 586 BC. It's found in 2 Kings. It said Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, set fire to the temple of the Lord and the royal palace and all the houses of Jerusalem. Every important building he burned down. The Babylonians broke up the bronze pillars, the movable stands, the bronze sea that were in the temple of the Lord, and they carried the bronze to Babylon. They also took away the pots, the shovels, the wick trimmers, the dishes, and all the bronze article used in the temple service. The commander of the imperial guard took away the censers and sprinkling bowls and all that were made of pure gold or silver. I mean, they cleaned it out. I forgot who was the king at that time before the Babylonians come, but Babylon, y'all might remember, they sent a guy over there because they were paying taxes to Babylon. And he came through and the king said, yeah, y'all see all this? And he showed him all the gold and the silver and everything everywhere. And the guy went back to Babylon and told the king, he said, let's go get it. Duh, showing all that stuff. That king thought he was showing off. He was being set up. There's no record of King Nebuchadnezzar removing the Ark of the Covenant from the temple. The Ark of the Covenant has not been seen or heard of since this time in history. It is believed, y'all see my word believed, that the temple priests, they either hid the Ark of the Covenant in the catacombs somewhere below the temple, or that they carried it out of Jerusalem and hid it. But since 586 BC, I mean, there's a record of everything Nebuchadnezzar's people took out of the city. There's no mention of the Ark. So it's not been seen since. The Ark of the Covenant will appear again in the temple in Jerusalem in the last days at the time of God's choosing. I don't know, we keep saying we got to be in the last days. Our fathers before us probably said the same thing. We got to be in the last. How much worse can it get? I mean, can it get much worse than it is today? It's like America is Sodom and Gomorrah. It is really bad. But they will have to set up sacrifices again and the Ark of the Covenant before we begin the tribulation period. It was in Jerusalem where the wall around the city was rebuilt by Nehemiah 70 years after its destruction. So what happened is when the Babylonians come over, we use a date like 586 BC. Well, their wars could stretch 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years. But that's the best date they could pick inside of it. But he carried away all of the Jewish people, the Israelites, that were well educated, or they had skills, or they were wealthy. So what did he leave behind? Not much, right? So they took all these back to Babylon, but Nebuchadnezzar gave them some land and said, y'all live here. And it was decent land, farming and raising cattle. It was good land. But you are under the authority of King Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian king. 70 years went by, and the Persians came in, and they raided the Babylonians and ran them out. King Cyrus was the Persian military leader, and he came in and he ran them out, and he told the people in the Israelite people that were in captivity, you can go back if you want to, I don't care. But think about it, 70 years, how many of the older people, they've never seen Israel. They've never seen Jerusalem. They've never seen a temple. But thankfully, there were still some that had older people that hadn't died yet that started coming back. Nehemiah was the first. His job was to come back and rebuild the wall around the city. You can't do anything until you get a wall around the city to keep the others out. So that was his job to do. Nehemiah chapter 6 says the wall around Jerusalem was completed in 52 days. Around Jerusalem. You can go back and read that in Nehemiah, what they had to go through to build that thing. They had to, one place you got a spear in this hand and you're working with the other because all the others were trying to run them out, the Canaanite people and others around. 52 days to build the whole wall around. Well, it probably wouldn't be a great wall, but it was probably crude. But even at that, 52 days, that's a miracle by itself. That's God's work. It was in Jerusalem where the temple that was destroyed by the Babylonians was rebuilt. But it was very crude, and it's not counted when speaking of the first and the second temples. So you hear about the first temple, okay, so Solomon built that. You don't hear anything about this one. They go to the next one, and that was when Herod the Great, he wanted to please the Jews, so he helped rebuild a temple more magnificent than what Solomon had built. But in between, nobody mentions the fact that they rebuilt that temple as they came back from captivity. It was so crude that they don't even count that. And Haggai says, so the Lord stirred up the spirit of my man, Zerubbabel. On three, everybody's going to say that. 1, 2, Zerubbabel. Your lips just got to bounce around, don't they? I love that word, Zerubbabel. The Lord stirred up the spirit of Zerubbabel and the spirit of Joshua, the high priest, and the spirit of the whole remnant of the people that were there in captivity in Babylon. They came, they began to work on the house of the Lord Almighty their God on the 24th day of the 6th month. It was in Jerusalem where Jesus, a young lad, you see we're kind of moving along on these events that take place in Jerusalem. It was there where Jesus, a young lad, spoke with the religious leaders in the temple. After 3 days, they found him in the temple courts, sitting among the teachers, listening to them, and asking them questions. Everyone who heard him was amazed at his understanding and his answers. 12 years old. It was in Jerusalem where Jesus forgave the woman caught in adultery. In the book of John, he said, when Jesus had lifted up himself and he saw none but the woman, he said unto her, Woman, where are your accusers? Hath no man condemned thee? She said, No man, Lord. And Jesus said unto her, Neither do I condemn thee. But go and what? Sin no more. It was in Jerusalem where Jesus healed a blind man. After saying this, he spit on the ground, made some mud with his saliva, and he put it on the man's eyes. Go, he told him, wash in the pool of Siloam. So the man went and washed, and he came home seeing. Happened in Jerusalem. It was in Jerusalem where Jesus entered the city riding on a donkey. We call it Palm Sunday. Recorded in John chapter 12, the next day the great crowd that had come for the festival heard that Jesus was on his way to Jerusalem. They took palm branches and they went out to meet him, shouting, Hosanna! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the King of Israel. So those few among the Jews that believed Jesus was the Messiah, they welcomed him into the city. But that's a small amount compared to when the voices were shouting, give us Barabbas, crucify Jesus. They were a small amount. It was in Jerusalem where Jesus ran the money changers out of the temple. Jesus entered the temple courts and he drove out all who were buying and selling there. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the benches of those selling doves. It is written, he said to them, my house will be called a house of prayer, but you are making it a den of robbers. You know what was going on there? Anybody got an idea? People traveled for Pentecost. They traveled long ways to come to Jerusalem. And they wanted to give sacrifices. Well, some of them didn't travel with a dove or any other, a lamb or anything. So when they got there, they would sell them to you. How about the price of it, you think? At that time of the year, yeah, David's doing that. Say, exactly, they run the price up on there. That's why he called them a den of robbers. They were using it to take advantage of the people, and people had no choice. They got to buy it because, you know, it's almost like buying insurance.
Yeah.
Woo. We went through that this week. It's going up. You have one little hailstorm somewhere, and all of a sudden everybody's insurance goes way up. But this is what was going on in the temple, and Jesus ran them out. Now you know why. They were taking advantage of the people. It was in Jerusalem where Jesus was tried and convicted. But with loud shouts, they insistently demanded that he be crucified, and their shouts prevailed. So Pilate decided to grant their demand. He released the man. Who was that man? Barabbas, a murderer. They released the man who had been thrown into prison for insurrection and murder, the one they asked for, and they surrendered Jesus to their will. Every year at that time, the Feast of Pentecost, the Roman governor over Jerusalem at that time would allow one person to be released from prison. That was the little thing he threw in. But when he brought out Barabbas, Pilate was afraid of Jesus. And he brought out Barabbas thinking, well, they'd say, well, don't turn Barabbas loose, he's a murderer. But those unbelieving Jews wanted Jesus crucified so badly, they said, let Barabbas go. So that was trial number 7, if you remember. They let the crowd be the jury and the judge and the prosecutor. It was in Jerusalem where Jesus carried his own cross through the streets. In John chapter 19 it said, and the soldiers took charge of Jesus carrying his own cross, and he went out to the place of the skull, which in Aramaic is called Golgotha. It was just outside of Jerusalem where Jesus was nailed to a cross, then died, and was buried. Just outside the gates. It was just outside of Jerusalem where Jesus defeated death, and he arose from the grave. It was in Jerusalem where Jesus appeared to his disciples after his resurrection. John chapter 20 said, on the evening of that first day of the week when the disciples were together with, and I underline this, locked doors. Why were the doors locked? Huh?
They were afraid.
They were afraid, yeah. Somebody said, oh, you're one of them. Remember what they said to Peter? You're one of them. No, not me. So they got the doors locked for fear of the Jewish leaders. Jesus came and stood among them and said, peace be with you. Got more to read on that, but I want to make a point. We talk about his resurrected body. What is it like? Well, somebody says it's like a spirit because he came in there. Nobody unlocked the doors. Nobody opened the door. He appeared. Oh, so he's a spirit. But then later when he tells Thomas, touch my side, oh, well, that's a body. It's something you and I cannot comprehend. How can you be part spirit and part body? That's the kind of body we will have when we're taken up in the rapture. He said, peace be with you. Continue on. After he said this, he showed them his hands and his side. These disciples were overjoyed when they saw the Lord. While they were locked up in that room for 3 days, do you think they were waiting for him to appear? Opinion, you can ask.
I don't think so.
Yeah, I kind of think they think, well, he's dead, he's buried, it's over. I mean, they had to be confused. I don't think they were, as many times as he told them, I must die, be buried, and raised on the third day, I don't know if that stuck in their heads. It was like, lock the doors, man. We don't know what he is. Interesting. It was in Jerusalem where Jesus ascended into heaven, where he will remain until the day that he returns to earth with the new Jerusalem. In next Sunday's lesson, we're going to do that. We're going to have the new earth, the new heaven, the new Jerusalem. It's recorded in Acts 1, he said, after he said this, he was taken up before their very eyes, and a cloud hid him from their sight. He went right up and went into the clouds. And a cloud hid him from their sights. They were looking intently up into the sky as he was going, when suddenly 2 men dressed in white stood beside them. Men of Galilee, they said, why do you stand here looking up into the sky? This same Jesus who has been taken from you into heaven will come back in the same way. What way? In the clouds, as you have seen him go into heaven. He went up into the clouds. At the rapture, he'll come back in the clouds. Not all the way to the earth, but just in the clouds. The Apostle John said that he saw a new Jerusalem coming down from heaven. You and I will spend an eternity in the new Jerusalem. John said, I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride, beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with his people. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and their God. We're not up in the third heaven where God is now with him. He's going to come down, the new earth, the new heaven, the new Jerusalem. God will dwell with us. Getting into next week's lesson. There's a song that's written about a man who dreamed that he saw Jerusalem, that holy city. The song, The Holy City, it's often called Jerusalem, the song. It was written in 1892 by an English lawyer named Frederick Edward Weatherly, with music by British composer Stephen Adams. It is estimated that Frederick had written lyrics to at least 3,000 songs. Wow. His 2 most famous songs are Danny Boy And of course, the holy city. In this song, the man is singing, he says, he dreamed, he saw the old Jerusalem, and then he saw the new Jerusalem. Listen to the words of this song. Now what I did is I went and put background behind it so we could have the words on it so you can see the words. Next Sunday, we're going to do the same song, but this time you're going to be able to see them singing it, and it's without the words. But watch for the words of this song.
Last night I lay asleep, there came a dream so fair. We stood in old Jerusalem beside the temple there. I heard the children singing, and never as they sang, methought the voice of angels from heaven answered. Methought the voice of angels from heaven And then before my dream was changed, the streets no longer rang. Hushed were the glad hosannas, the little children sang. The sun grew dark with mystery, the moon was cold and chill, as the shadow of the cross rose upon an holy hill. As the shadow of that cross arose upon an holy And once again the scene was changed, new earth there seemed to be. I saw the holy city beside the tide sea. The light of God was on its streets, the gates were open wide. The road might enter, and know what was behind. Jerusalem, and
Pray for Jerusalem. Your teacher did. How about that? Have a blessed week. You get a break today. You get out early. That song,
2 weeks.
I can't tell you how many times at nighttime when I'm by myself, I run across it on YouTube and I just play it again. Willie, I know you enjoy it because you know who conducted it. What is it? Andre Rao? I don't know how you pronounce his name. We're going to see it next week. But we're going to see him, and we're going to see the three tenors, they call them, and present that song. Go home and find, just listen. He's just, the old Jerusalem passes away. It's going to be a new Jerusalem. Next week, we're going to talk about that new Jerusalem. Next Sunday. A new heaven, a new earth, a new Jerusalem. In Isaiah, he said, "For behold, I create new heavens and a new earth, and the former things will not be remembered or come to mind." Now that little statement on the bottom, I don't remember reading that before. When it says, "Former things will not be remembered or come to mind." I don't think anybody wants to try to explain that. Don't know. Do we start as a new life? I don't know. Nobody knows. Gives you something to go home and think about. You can come and give me the answer next week. All right, we're going to get out of here 10 minutes early, but I hope you enjoyed learning about the old Jerusalem, and next week we'll study the others. And then the